Bashar al-Assad. Go Bashar al-Assad.
Bashar al-Assad.
Bashar al-Assad.
Bashar al-Assad.
Bashar al-Assad.
The fact is, Assad is a war criminal.
Assad.
Toppling of Bashar al-Assad.
He is a war criminal.
Bashar al-Assad.
How did it come to this? One man killing his own people through unspeakable ways. This video answers a few questions. Major events in the first decade of his rule that made Assad what he became, and how did he manage to hold power for that long? Starting from being called the hope of Syria to the chemical weapons attacks on his own people. President Hafez al-Assad, the ruler of Syria since 1970, is old now. His health is failing. He has groomed his eldest son Bashar al-Assad for the top job. But in 1994, Bashar was killed in a car accident. Enter his younger brother Bashar al-Assad. A doctor by profession, studying in London, he has to come back to console his family and assist with the funeral arrangements. It was in the air that he now has to take up the responsibility. No man could have seen what he'll do to his own people. Syria was sort of secular nation with 70% Sunni Muslims, 10% Alawites and 10% Christians, and other smaller ethnic and religious groups like Kurds, the Druze and the Turkmen. The Assads were Alawite. Under Hafez al-Assad, Alawites had gained considerable influence, especially in the military. 6 years later, when Hafez al-Assad was on his deathbed, the generals in the state military security apparatus gathered around Mustafa Slas, Hafez al-Assad, long-time loyal Minister of Defense, to discuss the succession. Bashar al-Assad transitioned seamlessly into power, with no serious opposition. He was called the Hope in Syria at the time, for it was his job to transition Syria from a struggling hodgepodge of a nation into a wild economic powerhouse. The Alawite-dominated military security apparatus, as well as leading, mostly Sunni businessmen tied to the regime, saw Bashar al-Assad as the best chance, or perhaps the least worst, of maintaining their political, economic and social positions and status. This, above all reasons, why Bashar became the president. He was young. He had gained a certain amount of popularity. He was an Alawite, and most importantly, he was an Assad. President Bashar al-Assad officially took the constitutional oath of office and delivered his inaugural speech in Damascus on July 17, 2000. By Syrian standards, it was a remarkably enlightened speech. In his speech, he made economic reform a clear priority. There was genuine exuberance among many who had longed for change in Syria. Bashar inherited from his father an authoritarian state. It was in a dilapidated condition, characterized by a stagnant economy, pervasive corruption, and political repression. It was as existed in a number of authoritarian countries in the Middle East, a Mukhabarat state. That is one in which security or intelligence services, in combination with certain trusted elements of their military, are dominant in controlling the population and in defending the regime against perceived threats, both internal and external. The economic situation in Syria was dire. The dominant force, the public sector, was tied to political apparatus. The Syrians often faced crisis as the economy based on oil and agriculture seemed to never catch a break. So the Assad chose selective liberalization to ease tension among the people. Selective because too much of it would let power slip off their hands. People tied to the public sector kept the regime in power, and the selective businesses that were running would need political approval, keeping the bourgeoisie close, leading to a de facto coalition, making a cycle with government, thus breeding more corruption for the common man. As Ghassan Salameh wrote, the state of affairs could be described as bourgeoisies leaving politics to their masters who secured the stability that these bourgeoisies need to enrich themselves. Bashar has seen the economic boom of the West while in London. He wanted to make his country's situation better on economic front and relieve some pressure through opening up politics. The 7 to 8 months leading to him becoming the president, he was tolerating open criticism, made media more free, and let political prisoners out of jail. But this short-lived amnesty came to halt when Bashar's general basically told him, this is not the way things are done in Syria. All reforms were directly or indirectly retracted. And then this happened.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The entire foreign and regional policy flipped. While Bush was overturning Afghanistan, he decides old foes still alive had to go in the global war of terrorism. He told Americans that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq in 2003. An Operation Iraqi Freedom was launched. Looking from Bashar's point of view, he was surrounded by hostility. Palestinians had risen up against Israel in Al-Aqsa Intifada and had to be vocally supported by Assad for the stability of his power, thus breaking chances of any positive engagement with the US. Meanwhile, neighboring Iraq was also being invaded by the Americans. He understood that the response to US must be asymmetric, so that the full military might of United States is not unleashed upon him. So he engaged in discussions with Washington and also let jihadis cross over to Iraq while verbally assaulting Israel, maintaining his positive position on Hezbollah and Hamas. This was a fine line to tread. Assad failed to understand that Washington won't tolerate it anymore. Assad thought there was a clear distinction between Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, but Washington did not understand that. The invasion of Iraq implanted 150,000 US troops in a country on Syria's eastern border. Syria was surrounded to the north with Turkey, a NATO member, and to the south with Israel, a staunch US ally. The only immediate neighboring ally remaining, Hezbollah. Damascus wanted Bush doctrine to fail. It wanted Iraq to be its last victim. There was a real possibility that Americans could cross over to Syria to depose Assad too. Hopefully, that would not happen. Increasing pressure was holding Assad hostage. He has to maintain his popularity among majority Sunnis who opposed US while also doing the balancing act for the US. This is not how Arab nationalism was supposed to be. So by 2005, the perception of Bashar al-Assad in United States and much of the international community, including key regional actors, was quite negative. But it was also thought that he had survived the worst of it without getting deposed. But then this happened.
It was an assassination that would shape Lebanese politics for years to come. February 14, 2005, former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri was killed in a massive blast in downtown Beirut, along with 21 other people. Suspicion for the killing immediately turned to neighboring Syria.
Rafik Hariri, billionaire businessman and the former Lebanese Prime Minister, was assassinated in a massive car bomb attack. Prime suspect, Damascus. The French, Americans, and especially the Arab world called on Assad to remove his troops from Lebanon. Another hit. But something was soothing at least. US was turning its attention towards Iran's alleged attempts to develop a nuclear program. Bashar understood that focusing on problems outside, he could easily justify the problems inside to his people. Little economic development, no political reforms, and a stricter security state. To appease the Americans, Damascus handed over Saddam Hussein's half-brother Sabawi Ibrahim al-Hassan al-Takriti, as well as 9 other fugitives. Al-Hassan was one of the most wanted, but this did little to nothing to appease the Americans. They wanted full cooperation, which wasn't possible, taking into account the homegrown problems. Bush administration was also aware that too much pressure on Syria could topple Assad, and his place could be taken by Islamist extremists. By the start of 2006, things were not looking good for the Americans as well, as the bombing of Al-Aqsa Mosque, suspected to be perpetrated by Al-Qaeda, gave rise to sectarian violence which was easy to spill over to Syria, and the only thing holding together the Assad regime, the promise of stability, could fail too. By the start of 2006, one good thing happened for Assad, which was Israel-Hezbollah war in 2006. At least one of his allies was able to hold the American-backed Israel, who was unable to defeat Hezbollah, and a victory for Hezbollah was a victory for Syria. And the Bush administration basically told Assad, there was nothing you could do to hurt us, and you have nothing to offer us. The hope of improving relations with the Americans was slashed. Assad will have to wait for Bush's term in office to get over, to have some hope from the next president. It's 2007 now. Assad hopes to solve problems in home front too. He wants the 500,000 to 1.4 million Iraqi refugees to go back to their own country. They are straining the already brittle economy of Syria. In April of 2007, Nancy Pelosi lands in Damascus in the first high-profile visit to Syria. But nothing could actually change till Bush was gone. But by this time, the quid pro quo was going for far too long. Nothing real in Syrian economy was actually addressed that was promised in Assad's inauguration speech. A few tourism reforms to keep the country afloat would not help. And to put a cherry on top, American forces did a cross-border raid to kill a senior Al-Qaeda member, Abu Khadia. Hope came in form of selection of Obama in the presidential elections. Obama actually wanted to solve the problem and repeatedly held high-level talks with Damascus. While there was some goodwill, the internal security apparatus embedded in the US foreign policy abstained from helping Syrians with economy, or anything for that matter. By the time Bashar al-Assad was a seasoned head of state, no longer a mild-mannered doctor. He will need his cunning, cause nothing could have prepared him for what a faraway nation would bring upon his doorstep: revolution. One good thing going for him was he was still popular among his people. Despite the lack of reformist rule that he promised, Assad began to believe that he was born to rule Syria. Nothing could depose him. European and Middle Eastern diplomats were beginning to travel to Damascus to meet Bashar and other Syrian officers, and Bashar's schedule was filling up. He was going for negotiations with Israel. He knew if he could get Golan back, he would be hailed as a hero. All mistakes could be forgiven in that light. Compared to the neighboring states, Syria was seen as a fairly stable place. Los Angeles Times reads Syria, a bright star in the Middle East. All seemed to be well. People in power understood what works in the Arab world. Only two kinds of leaders survive: those who rely on their people for support and those who get support from the West. It became apparent that the West would leave their man in time of need in a blip. Take Shah of Iran. But people sort of held on. Take Nasser. Until this happened. While American sanctions on Assad rolled, another incident from Tunisia would mark the beginning of end for the Assad regime: the Arab Spring. Mohammed Bouazizi, a university graduate selling fruits and vegetables humiliated by security forces for bribe, couldn't stand to be insulted for his hard work. He humiliated himself as a result. As it turns out, he crossed the thin line that state forces had drawn to scare away the masses. People were not scared anymore. The pain resonated with the common man. They came onto the streets demanding change, and that's what they got. Entire Arab world overturned. Regimes made quick changes, scared for losing their power. As Tunisia fell, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen fell too. Back in Syria, Assad thought his right to power was different, that he was with the people. Not only he had opposed American occupation in Iraq, he has opposed Israel too. His ally Hezbollah was successful to some degree in not being completely annihilated by the Jews. He was on the right side of Arab nationalism. Nothing he had done to lose the support of his people. He could not be any more wrong. He would see the wrath of his and his father's Mukhabarat state decimate any hope of peaceful living for common men. Assad himself would become a war criminal for crimes against his own people who had been with him for over the years. He would create a struggle for life which would last for over a decade. Till now, he was only the victim of his own incompetence and foreign powers meddling beside his borders. But he would become much more a monster.